With so much religious confusion in the world, a disciple can easily become confused and disoriented. So, how does one determine if he or she is in the right church? Or how can we be sure that the church we attend is adhering to the right doctrine? Well, why don't we begin by looking at the word church itself? You see, the word church is found more than 100 times in the New Testament. So obviously, it's a very important word if the inspired writers recorded it that often. But what does it mean exactly? Is that the actual word that they used? And if not, then where did our English word for church come from? Well, the first time that you see the word church, it appears in the New Testament in Matthew chapter 16, verse 18, when Jesus Christ said, "And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." Now, the word used here in our English Bibles was translated from a Greek word, Eklesia. Jesus Christ didn't actually say, "I will build my church." He said, "I will build my Eklesia." And there's a bit of a difference between what he actually said and the word that many translators have decided to use in our English versions of the Bible. First of all, the Greek word ekklesia means a gathering or an assembly, a congregation or community. And many preachers like to point out that it is composed of two words. The word ek, meaning out of, and klesia or kaleo, meaning to call. And so they'll say that Christians are the called out, as in being called out of the world. And that might be an applicable statement, but did you know that the New Testament never really uses the word in that manner or context? Instead, it is always used in the sense of an assembly. Acts chapter 19, verses 32 through 41 is a great example of that word being used in its general sense and even apart from the spiritual connotation of the word. In 1 Corinthians 14, verse 23, it explains it quite well, saying, "Therefore, if the whole church," that is the ekklesia, "comes together in one place." Quite clearly, we can see that it's talking about an assembly. So what Jesus said in Matthew 16 implies that he was going to build a gathering, an assembly, or a community. And that's really a better way to understand the word church and what it truly means in the original language. So think about church as a group or an assembly. Now, secondly, our English word church comes from a derivative of an Old English word, Kirche, and that has a German influence that brought it about. Sometimes it's spelled differently. For example, Kirch or Circe or even Chirche. But the word itself literally means belonging to or pertaining to God. So in that sense of the word, it would be correct to say something like the church building, for it is indeed the building that we use to pertain to or belong to God. So this form of the word, this Kirche or Chirche, was introduced into our Bibles when a man by the name of John Wycliffe copied and published a translation of the Latin Vulgate, which was the Bible of the Catholic Church at the time. He translated it into the Middle English of his day, which is the language of authors like Chaucer. And in 1380, Wycliffe's translation became the very first Bible written in English. And in it, he translated Matthew 16:18 in the Old English style. "Ye shall build my churche." He used that term churche for ekklesia instead of translating it as assembly. 146 years later, another man by the name of William Tyndale produced the first English translation that came directly from the Hebrew and the Greek texts. His 1526 version was the first English Bible that was mass-produced, and his translation of Matthew 16:18 read, "I will build my congregation." So he translated the word into what it actually means. And after that, the Coverdale Bible of 1535, the Great Bible of 1539, and the Bishop's Bible of 1568 all followed the same pattern and translated the word ekklesia as congregation. It wasn't until the Geneva Bible was published in 1560 that the use of the word church was inserted for Eklesia and became the more common term used among translators. And then lastly, the King James Version solidified its use of that word church, and it has continued to be that way ever since in all subsequent English versions of the Bible. So in summary, the true meaning of the word church is not really a reference to a building or even a place you go. Church, as the inspired New Testament writers intended to use the word, means the collection of disciples or the assembly of the saints. The Apostle Peter described it this way: "You also, as living stones, are being built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood," in 1 Peter 2, verse 5. Therefore, it is the people that make up the church. The building is just where the church meets, where it assembles. Do you now see the difference in what Jesus Christ said? He certainly wasn't talking about building a big, elaborate brick-and-mortar structure. He was talking about spiritual things. He was talking about building a community of His people, His disciples, that is now known as the church.